Hey everybody, Brandon with FastDataScience.ai here, and welcome to another episode of This Week in AI, the show where I tee up some of the latest headlines in data science, machine learning, and artificial intelligence. So spring has officially sprung in my neck of the woods, and although I may have nearly lost my voice as a function of that springing, I think actually this week we learned that artificial intelligence may have found its voice. So, yes, this week in AI is going to cover the elephant in the newsroom, if you will, surrounding artificial intelligence. Did Google actually create a sentient AI model? We're going to cover that. I'm going to give you my opinion. Everyone else is giving their opinion. It's a popular topic, and so of course it caught my eye this week. So we will dive into that. But before we do, you're going to have to listen to me complain a little bit, and then I'm going to dive into a couple of other articles that I found that I thought were really interesting. So this week, today is June 17th, 2022. And before we jump into the articles, usually you're used to seeing my bot results, right? I do a little data science where I scrape my Gmail and I pull out all of the news alerts on data science, machine learning, and artificial intelligence. Well, unfortunately, Google has changed their security requirements for accessing from third-party applications, like in this case, Python, the Gmail backend. And so I'm left with an error this week in my code, which basically means I need to update my security protocol and register an app so I can actually scrape my Gmail again. And so taking time away to do that, eventually that will happen. But nevertheless, there were a lot of really cool articles that I was still able to spot. I read, and now I want to share those with you. So complaining aside, let's go ahead and jump into the top headlines for this week. All right, number one, why self-taught data scientists can't survive in the job market. All right, so this caught my eye because I was like, well, wait a second. Self-taught data scientists can't survive in the job market? Like, what data scientist isn't self-taught? Sure, you might have gotten a degree because now there are actually institutions that offer data science degrees, but you can't actually learn everything in data science in a degree program. The field is just too complex. There's too much going on. And you need some application to really learn data science. So every data scientist is pretty much self-taught. So I dove into this article because I was interested in what exactly this article was saying. So here's the deal. This article is not actually saying that data scientists can't hold a job, that self-taught data scientists can't hold a job. No, instead they're saying that maybe they just don't want to. So this article, I think, comes on the heels of the Great Resignation, or the Great Migration, as they call it, that particularly definitely affected data science and data scientists. And it tackles why data scientists are potentially leaving their jobs in great masses. Now, it's happening less and less today, but this article, again, I think comes on the heels of that movement and tries to answer that question by pointing to a couple of different factors. So the first factor, which I think is a really good point, actually, that a lot of budding data scientists and aspiring data scientists should really understand and come to know, because it's probably going to impact you even if you get hired onto a somewhat mature data science team. And that is that there are often failed expectations. So data scientists often come into their data science roles expecting to do the fun and sexy things that data scientists do, like train really cool and sophisticated prediction or classification or transformer models on data to impact the business. But in reality, most of the time, we're not actually doing those sorts of things. In fact, a lot of businesses, particularly medium-sized businesses that are trying to build data science teams, often don't have the infrastructure that's required to allow data scientists to perhaps train those large sophisticated models or access data. Or once they do train something, put it into production so that it actually has some impact on the business. So data scientists find themselves often doing things that are related to data science, but not the cool, fun, sexy part of data science, like, for example, data engineering. Those failed expectations can lead some folks, according to this article, or so the argument goes, feeling a little bit like, well, this wasn't what I expected, and so I'm going to leave my job. The other interesting point that the article makes is that data scientists often fail to recognize that part of their job is being seen as a useful data professional. The idea being that you might have to fulfill some ad hoc requests from the business that have nothing to do with data science. They think it does, and if you can produce it, they think you're an amazing magician of data, hence a data scientist. But in reality, it might be just a simple report or a query that you produce, and you're able to do it fairly quickly because guess what? You're a very useful data professional. And I think this article makes the argument that a lot of data scientists don't really like that label and they don't really like doing that kind of work. They think that they're going to be doing the more sexy, fun, cool things like building really sophisticated models. Okay, that said, really interesting points. I think some good take home lessons, especially for those who are trying to jump into the field. Let's get on to article number 2. Article number 2, synthetic data is about to transform artificial intelligence. Okay, there's no question that the rise of synthetic data is becoming more and more common. And in fact, this article provides a really interesting statistic from Gartner that says that by 2024, 60% of AI systems will be trained using synthetic data. So what is synthetic data? Synthetic data is data that is effectively not real. That is data that is trained or created from real data, but it produces things that look really real. Probably the most successful application of synthetic data has been in the area of computer vision. What's really cool about how we train those synthetic data sort of models that help to produce that fake data is that we can actually influence it to produce fake data that may capture rare or unexpected scenarios that are difficult to find real data on. And so we can use those scenarios to help train our AI models to be much more robust and much more sensitive to rare conditions. A lot of these models are built on the foundation of generative adversarial neural nets, or GANs. And really, this article tackles how GAN architectures are evolving. Particularly, it talks about the rise of diffusion models. Diffusion models work by adding more and more noise to an image and then successfully decomposing that noise to return the image to its original state. These denoising models are really good at creating really highly detailed images. And so we see this in OpenAI's DALL-E 3, I think, I can't remember, the DALL-E model, which is, I might be confusing it with GPT-3, I apologize, but DALL-E is a generative model that uses diffusion models to create really cool images from language descriptions. And so these diffusion models and these GANs and these architectures are successful in creating more and more realistic fake examples of data. In addition, what we're starting to see, as the article covers, is that we're moving beyond just computer vision. So it's not just the case that these synthetic data models are producing images, but now they're starting to also produce really good instances of language representations that may be rare, and moving beyond that into even potentially things like insurance claims data. So Anthem has partnered with Google to actually investigate creating synthetic language data that represent medical records that are not real but look real. And then using that data to be able to train their systems to do certain things with that data. So lots of really interesting trends here happening, I think, and these are some really kind of specialized models that are starting to gain a lot of traction in the field of artificial intelligence. Something to keep your eye on, and something that I'm sure we're going to hear a lot more about, because there are a rising number of startups that are contributing to this trend and really kind of driving the innovation that's happening. Okay. What caught my eye this week? All right, so what caught my eye this week is something that you already know about. Everybody's talking about it. Did Google actually create a sentient artificial intelligence model? Okay, what does that mean? What does that mean? That effectively means that Google may have created, or at least so one of their researchers has suggested, Google may have created an artificial intelligence model that is aware of itself. All right, let's tackle this in a little bit more detail. So the Google engineer who sees companies' AI as sentient thinks a chatbot has a soul. Okay, this has been all over the news. Lots of people weighing in. Lots of people are debunking what this particular researcher has argued. All right, but let's go ahead and dive into the source of his argument and talk a little bit about my impression of whether or not Google actually created a sentient artificial intelligence. So Google created a model called Lambda. Lambda is essentially a very large language model similar to GPT-3 from OpenAI, which has received a lot of press, because those models are actually really good at presenting themselves as conversationalists. That is, you can ask those models questions and they'll reply in ways that are intelligible, that seem to make sense, and in a lot of cases are interesting. Google has taken that to the next level with their Lambda model, and their Lambda model, as a lot of these conversational models are built from transformer neural net architectures. Actually, Google has a really great website on their Lambda model that kind of gives you a conceptual understanding of how transformers work. But at the end of the day, the real interesting point of Lambda is that Lambda can engage in the arbitrariness of conversations. So it feels as though Lambda is producing some self-aware responses. In some research that was done by this Google engineer, the engineer started to learn that Lambda was producing responses such as, I'm afraid to be turned off. I feel fear. I like to meditate. And I think if nothing else, the responses do raise some really interesting questions. And I think the Google engineer raises a really interesting question. Well, what's going on when the model says, I meditate? Is there something happening in the architecture? Likely the answer to that question is no. And actually, I think this is a really good example of why we must be really careful of our own human tendency to easily interpret agency when none exists. Our brains are actually designed to default that things around us have agency. It's self-protective. If we assume something has agency, we are better and more likely to respond to it more quickly. For example, the wind blowing in the trees, our initial reaction might be that something is there, a bear or something that might attack us. And so having that assumption puts us at the ready so that we're more likely to survive. So it makes a ton of sense that we over-perceive agency in things. And this is true with these chat models. We are essentially experiencing a sense of interaction, and so we have a tendency, maybe a bias even, to appreciate that that is agency or a representation of agency, when in reality it's not. It's our own interpretation, our own bias being projected onto that system. This has lots of consequences. If a highly trained engineer at Google is thinking that the AI may have agency, then you can believe that a lot more people are going to start to also believe this. Whether or not it's true may matter less than the fact that this conversation is happening. And so that's going to impact our politics, our economics, and our social environments going forward. We have to really understand how to answer this question appropriately. Most people are debunking this claim. I think the claims are interesting. There are some interesting questions about whether or not the complexity of a system creates some emergent properties. Now, are these models truly complex enough to create those emergent properties? Maybe, maybe not. We don't know, I think, is the better question. And so we need some more research to really understand the consequence of this. But the bigger point is that people will start to believe that these things may actually be aware. What are the consequences of that belief is maybe even more important than the reality of whether or not that belief is accurate. All right, well, thank you so much for joining today. Here are the links. I'll post these in the comments. Subscribe, share. Love to get your thoughts, especially on the reality that maybe we've created a sentient AI. Probably not, but maybe. And so thanks again. Hope you have a great weekend, and I will see you all next week.